So one of the more controversial aspects of the Nintendo Switch 2 is the recent changes that they made to the EULA, the End User License Agreement, where Nintendo, at any point in time, if they deem that you did something that they didn't want you to do with the console, they can essentially just brick it. Right here we have a report from Stephen Totillo. So right down here we have the old EULA that simply said you're not allowed to lease, rent, sublicense, publish, copy, modify, adapt, translate, reverse engineer, decompile, or disassemble all or any portion of the Nintendo account services without Nintendo's written consent or unless otherwise expressly permitted by applicable law. And then that has since been kind of expanded upon with the following. Without limitations, you agree that you may not publish, copy, modify, reverse engineer, lease, rent, decompile, disassemble, distribute, offer for sale, or create derivative works of any portion of the Nintendo account services, bypass, modify, decrypt, defeat, tamper with, or otherwise circumvent any of the functions or protections of the Nintendo account services, including through the use of any hardware or software that would cause the Nintendo account services to operate other than in accordance with its documentation and intended use, obtain, install, or use any unauthorized copies of Nintendo account services, or exploit the Nintendo account services in any manner other than to use them in accordance with the applicable documentation and intended use. In other words, exactly as Nintendo meant for the device to be used. Any sort of modification, any sort of people kind of trying to tailor that experience based on how they would prefer it will be liable for you essentially getting your system banned. Or as it says right here, you acknowledge that if you fail to comply with the foregoing restrictions, Nintendo may render the Nintendo account services and or the applicable Nintendo device permanently unusable in whole or in part. This clause was not there before, where they basically are saying we are allowed to remotely break your system, make it unusable as we deem fit, based on whether we deem you use our device the way we intended. And we're already seeing reports of people getting their Switch 2s banned, particularly because of the use of something called Mig Switch. So right here we have Switch Tools saying that my Switch 2 test has been banned after using the Mig Switch with perfectly legal dumps of my own cartridges. So it would seem that Nintendo can detect something. So Mig Switch, for those who don't know, is essentially a Switch cartridge that allows you to insert a micro SD card, and if you insert games in that micro SD card, Mig Switch will allow you to play the games in that micro SD card on an actual Switch hardware. Now, it's important to note that that within itself is not illegal. What's illegal is if you download copies of a game that you don't own, if you pirate those games, put them on your micro SD card, and then play them, then that is piracy. But if you dump your own games and put them in this micro SD card and use Mig Switch to play those games, that is not illegal. That's just the user customizing their experience. Some people don't like to carry around all of their cartridges, and so they like the convenience of having this one cartridge that has all their games, dumps of games that they've already bought. That may not have been Nintendo's intended use, but that act that uses games you already own is not in itself illegal or illicit. But Nintendo doesn't care because Mig Switch does make piracy easier, and so their kind of solution is to nuke anyone who uses Mig Switch. And so people who have been inserting or trying to use Mig Switch for Nintendo Switch 2, which doesn't seem to work, have been met with the following error code 21244508. And the error message here says it all. The use of online services on this console is currently restricted by Nintendo. And we've been seeing similar reports of people who tried using Mig Switch getting their Switch 2s banned. Here on Reddit, on YouTube, we have somebody who just says, don't try the Mig Switch because it got their Switch 2 banned and completely restricted. What this ban does is essentially completely disable your ability to access the Nintendo eShop and any sort of online service. So when it comes to like digital games, you can't download or re-download them. You can't use the game key cards because those rely on some kind of download for you to be able to access those games. You can still play games that are already downloaded and you haven't deleted, or games that fully come in physical medium, but with future updates, requirements, and stuff like that, a brick Switch 2 makes it like mostly useless. And this ban is a system-wide ban. It's essentially bricking the console's online functionalities and ability to access Nintendo services. It doesn't restrict the accounts that were the offenders. It's the system as a whole. And so what you're seeing is situations like this, where a man, for example, bought a used Nintendo Switch 2 only to discover that Nintendo Switch 2 was getting the error code 21244508. 4508, suggesting that the system, we're seeing folks are trying to test the waters with the Nintendo Switch 2, and when that doesn't go their way and the system gets banned, they sell it off, and then, they probably buy a new Switch or something. Meanwhile, people who are buying Switch 2s for cheaper, used, are getting the short hand of the stick. And there's no way to reverse a ban once it's in place, or Nintendo. It's just highly unlikely that Nintendo will take the time or, enact the measures to undo the ban. Once a system is banned, it's pretty much as good as banned. Because it's system-wide and it's not banning accounts, it paves the road to these kinds of situations where we're going to see a lot of brick Switch 2s in the secondhand market. So yeah, the general consensus out there is that a lot of people find Nintendo's measures to be incredibly extreme. Like, I understand that they need to protect their property and the like, and yes, piracy, if you are in fact stealing games that, you haven't paid for, that can obviously constitute as a crime. And, being measures in place for that is not the issue here. The issue is that Nintendo is enacting policies that just feel incredibly shady to normalize, because a company just having complete control over a piece of hardware you purchased, and them having such a level of restriction where they can completely brick your console or disable key functions that can render that device almost completely useless. Just the ability for them to remotely do that, have a kill switch for something you purchased, that's rather disconcerting, especially when the actions that can lead to that ban is not, strictly speaking, illegal. Again, the idea of you taking your own games, dumping them, putting them in something like a Mig Switch, and having one cart that conveniently has all your games, that's just a way of enhancing your quality of life with that console. In the same way that you can enhance the quality of life of any purchase you make. Like if you buy a table from IKEA and you want to modify to make it better, should IKEA have the right to come in and take that table away from you, or cripple your ability to use the table by, taking away its legs or something? Of course not. In the same way, if you have your Nintendo Switch 2 and you find a way to make the experience of using it better, even if it is through something like a Mig Switch, if you're not doing the piracy, if you're not doing the illegal activities, if you're not engaging in, the illegal actions, should Nintendo be able to come in and say you can no longer use that device because you dared to modify the thing that you bought, or customize the thing that you bought in a way that Nintendo didn't intend? That's where the shadiness of this kind of comes in. That's where the lines get blurry. That's where things aren't so black and white. It's pretty gray. And in agreement is none other than Brazil's Consumer Protection Agency here, specifically from Sao Paulo. It's called Procon SP. They put out the following statement in which they express their intention to essentially legally pursue Nintendo for this EULA that does not comply with their consumer protection laws. It reads right here, this was published on June 25th, 2025, so, it's been a minute, but it's been spotted recently. It says right here, Procon SP demands contractual changes and warns of risks of companies without representation in Brazil. Procon SP notified Nintendo requesting changes to clauses considered abusive in contracts signed with Brazilian consumers. The main complaint involves the unilateral and unjustified cancellation of subscriptions to the company's services, referring to that error code that completely bans you from any online access to eShop, access to any online services that are vital in this day and age, especially when we live in a digital era where a lot of purchases are done digitally. And the system ban means basically inability to access your digital library. That is going to be the majority of what people have these days, which is why it's encouraged to buy physical because of situations like these. This statement continues, the action revealed a broader problem. Nintendo has no formal representation in Brazil. This makes it difficult to mediate conflicts and for consumer protection agencies to act. To handle the case, Procon SP had to contact the company's headquarters in the United States directly. Only then did the company appoint a law firm in Brazil, but only to handle the disputed clause. Lack of formal representation in the country is an important warning to consumers. Without this legal presence, the protection provided for in the Consumer Protection Code is limited. Essentially, Nintendo, if you're going to sell your products in Brazil, you got to have representatives there that are able to deal with disputes like, EULA concerns, or just, having any sort of customer service, just anything for consumers who are being sold products in that country to be able to have some way of resolving any issues that might crop up especially stuff that may be the fault of Nintendo or stuff involving Nintendo not complying with consumer protection laws in specific countries. Or as stated right here, the risk is real. The consumer may be left without a product, without a response, and without assistance. Here we have a quote from Director of Service and Guidance at Procon SP. The existence of a representation in Brazil should be one of the criteria for purchasing decisions, especially in digital services or foreign platforms. Without this base, Procons cannot fully operate as laws vary between countries. And then the statement finishes with, this caution applies to both abusive clauses and common problems. They're calling the clause of Nintendo being able to just break your console, render it unusable, or, completely remove your ability to access its key services abusive. So Brazil's for them, it's a hard no on this front. The statement continues, common problems such as late delivery or service failures. When the company is not registered in Brazil, there's often no way to hold it legally liable. Now, apparently, once Procon SP did reach out to Nintendo of America, they did eventually respond. It says right here that Nintendo said it will review the request from the Sao Paulo agency and respond within 20 days. So yeah, we'll see how this situation develops, whether Nintendo combats this by saying that the EULA is perfectly within legal boundaries. But what Nintendo has to understand, if that's the route they're going to take, is that every country just has different laws. And specifically, like in Europe and countries like Brazil, yeah, they take consumer protection pretty seriously. And in particular, clauses that say companies can just come in and destroy your product that you purchased if you use it in a way that the company didn't intend. Like, that's just, the level of control that grants companies, like normalizing such a thing, to demand that you use a product their way, or they can come in and just render it useless. That is just, those are shaky grounds that we, don't want to normalize or explore even. We don't want to give leeway on that front. It's one thing for companies to take protective measures. It's another for them to go for such a nuclear option that it impacts people who are engaging in ways that maybe Nintendo doesn't want, but isn't doing anything illicit. You can see right here Gerardo's coverage of this on social media sites like Twitter or X. That has garnered, millions of views and hundreds of thousands of likes, with plenty of people agreeing with Brazil's consumer protection agency here, or at least that's the general consensus. And it seems as though certain government agencies who took notice of Nintendo's new EULA, especially in regards to the Switch 2 and basically consoles moving forward, it seemed as though it caught enough attention where they actually do want to tackle this and do something about it and restrict Nintendo from being able to implement policies like that. Because look, end user license agreements, companies can kind of define their parameters, but those parameters still have to be within the confines of the federal laws in place in all of the respective countries that the Nintendo Switch 2 and Nintendo products are launching in. But yeah, I suppose we'll see how Nintendo will respond to this. I'm sure they'll get very defensive, as companies tend to do, and we'll try to combat this. But in the meantime, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the updated EULA and Brazil's response to it as far as their consumer protection agency is concerned. Do you think Nintendo's in the right for having those kinds of restrictions in the EULA, or are you more on the side of like a lot of the consumers and government agencies like Brazil, where it feels like they're taking too much of a nuclear option, and that the modification of a console, so long as nothing illicit is happening or no harm is genuinely being done, shouldn't constitute such a nuclear option kind of response from Nintendo that allows exertion of control that is concerning when it comes to like people buying products that companies can decide whether it works or not. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.